Jamie Raskin. Hang on, let me just get that off. You all have Jamie's, I should call you Congressman, but may I call you Jamie? Is that okay?
Yeah, please do.
You have his bio, so I'm not going to read every minute of it or every line of it because that takes away from our conversation. But just briefly, Jamie is in the Maryland 8th District. It's the other Montgomery County. We live out here in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, so you're from the other Montgomery County. As you all, I think, know, he's in his 4th term, about to be the 5th term, right?
Well, it's up to the voters.
Yep, talk to the voters. Well, hopefully the 5th term. I bet it is the 5th term. Also is the ranking member on the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. He's been on the Judiciary Committee, the Civil Rights Subcommittee, and he was the lead impeachment manager in the 2nd impeachment trial of Donald Trump, and also on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attacks on the Capitol, as I think you all know. Before that, he was a state senator, and before that, taught constitutional law at AU, American University, for 25 years. So a great constitutional scholar, which I'm sure we'll get to, and has written at least three incredible books that I have loved. And one of them, I think you might mention, was actually banned in Texas recently. And then I believe you were banned for life in Russia. So you might want to say that that's ruined your life, or maybe not. Anyway, with that, Jamie, welcome. It's a joy to have you. I'm just gonna, as Mindy mentioned, the first half are my questions. So let me just begin with my favorite first question, which is, can you tell us who or what inspired you when you were young to get on this path, amazing path of teaching and then of public service?
First of all, Elizabeth, thank you so much for having me with your wonderful students from the Fels Institute of Government. I can't see anybody. I don't know if, I just see a bunch of telephones, but I'm assuming that there's people on there. But anyway, hello, everybody. And
I think we have 200 people, so we're out here, believe me, 200.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an honor to be invited to talk to you guys here during the election season. Well, I suppose that's a complicated question, really, because there's so many influences that enter our lives at different points. But I mean, I think of a few different people, Elizabeth. I mean, one is clearly my maternal grandfather, who was the first Jewish person ever elected to the Minnesota state legislature. He was a state senator back in like 30s and 40s and stuff like that, during a period of like intense anti-Semitism then. And he was a very strong progressive New Deal Democrat. He was a Roosevelt person, and he was friends with all those great old Minnesota politicians like Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale and Donald Fraser. And Minnesota's got a pretty cool tradition. In fact, they had something honoring my grandfather a few weeks ago, and I went to Minneapolis for it. And I learned that Minnesota actually has had more Jewish U.S. senators than any other state in American history, more than New York or New Jersey or California or anything. But anyway, my grandpa, the reason he was an inspiration to me was, I mean, I was just a little kid, but he was sort of like a pillar in the community kind of guy. He's a very loving, warm man, but a tough guy too, like a very, I don't know, like an aggressive kind of tough guy. But he served people all day long. He was both a lawyer and a politician. And I came to imbibe the idea that a politician or a political leader is somebody who serves other people and helps to solve their problems. And I've always had this very deeply ingrained sense that those of us who aspire and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people. In the moment that we begin to think we're masters of the people, or kings or queens or royals or something like that, that is the moment to evict, eject, reject, impeach, convict, start all over again. That's what it means to live in a democracy. The highest office in the land is that of citizen. So anyway, my grandpa kind of modeled for me what it meant to be a servant. And, even when Congress is in its most deadlocked, paralyzed moments, as we are now, there are 24 things I can get done for people every day relating to their
Mhm,
Medicare, their Social Security, visas, passports, whatever it is. I mean, it's just solving people's problems. A lot of
mhm,
that is invisible because,
mhm,
everybody focuses on the drama and the spectacle, but that's a lot of what people
mhm,
in public office is about.
mhm.
I would say he's one main influence, but you
Great.
probably have to read my book Unthinkable, where I get
Yeah,
into more sort of the different things that moved me to do it.
absolutely. And it's a fabulous book. That's a great answer. And I'd never heard. Um, so you talk about, interestingly, that citizen is the highest office in the land. And that leads really to my next question, which is sort of a simple question, but it's a thoughtful one. And that is that democracy, the term democracy is often used in election debates and often everywhere. But it probably means different things to different people. So I wonder if you could tell us what you consider to be the essential elements of American democracy that most people could agree on.
Well, I appreciate that question. That's a cool question. I mean, democracy etymologically, of course, unifies the people and the power. So it's the system that brings the people and the power together. And from that standpoint, all of democracy's rivals, whether it's autocracy like we've got in Russia or in Hungary, or communist bureaucracy in China, or plutocracy, rule of the wealthy, or theocracy, religious rule, all of them are contenders with the idea that the people have the power, and they all have the character of the emperor's new clothes. Like somebody's trying to dress up a power grab over the people in some other idea. Sometimes my colleagues will get up on the floor, we're in a debate, and they'll say, oh, Raskin keeps talking about democracy. We're not a democracy, we're a republic. And they think they've struck some kind of master blow against, against my political philosophy, whatever it may be. And I always have to gently, reply to them, look, a republic is just a representative democracy. Res publica is the public thing, and a republic is a representative democracy because we can't fit 300 million people in the US House of Representatives or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's General Assembly or the school board meeting. We need different people doing different things at different times. And so we delegate to people the authority of going to do that. But that doesn't change the fundamental character of our constitutional project. And it's true, we began as a slave republic of white male property owners over the age of 21. But through successive waves of political, social, constitutional struggle, we've opened American life up to being a more perfect union, which in our trajectory means more democratic. So there are a lot of things that are dramatically imperfect in our politics today. We've got the gerrymandering of our federal and state legislative districts. We've got rampant voter suppression taking place across the country. We've got the filibuster, which is the rule of a tiny minority. Basically, one senator out of 100 can veto the entire Congress and blockading legislation. The electoral college system is the obsolete and failed. It's given us 5 popular vote losers as president in our history twice in this century alone. It marginalizes the vast majority of the American people who live in safe red states or safe blue states, and all power to Pennsylvania and everything. But we can't even get signs from the Harris Walz campaign because they're saying everything's going to Pennsylvania, like all the campaign visits and all the offices. And it's not because Pennsylvania, as much as I love it, and I do love your beautiful state, but it's not because Pennsylvania is a microcosm of America or because we have decided to delegate presidential decision making in elections to Pennsylvania. It's simply because there are roughly equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans who live there. And that's it. That's why it's become a swing state. And so you can think of it as a very whimsical, arbitrary, and bizarre way of running a presidential contest.
Mm-hmm.
42 of the states don't really matter, and then it all comes down
Mm-hmm.
to 7 or
Wow.
8 of them. So I guess my last point is, to me, if you looked in my heart, democracy is not just a static collection of institutional practices, although it is that, but democracy is always an unfinished project. It's something in motion. That the idea of uniting the people with the power is an historical challenge that's never ending. And it's a seesaw battle between democracy and the various contenders to the throne. But also, we can make democracy better all the time. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year exporting American constitutional democracy around the world. And one thing never come back to us with is, that electoral college thing you have, we think we'll import that to our democracy, right? That's not like a hot commodity or anything. So we're constantly learning. Like Jefferson said, he said he deplored the sanctimonious reverence with which people regarded the handiwork of the founders of the original generation. He says they were great men, they deserve our respect. I was one of them, but we have everything that they've got, except we've got something additional, which is the experience of all of the time that's lapsed between when they created America and when we live now. So we have to constantly keep our minds in thinking like constitutional founders ourselves.
Right. Wow. So absolutely. And, you stand on the shoulders of a lot of people from the very beginning. And you're right, it's an unfinished project. I love that you say that. How do we make it a more perfect union? Here's a really easy question. Let's say the Democrats gain the majority of the House back on November the 5th, and you're chair of the Oversight Committee. How would you actually make it a more perfect union? What one or two things would you do, and how would we get bipartisan support? Is it looking more to state and local governments to do things, or that's a big question for you there?
Well, for me, it's easy because I look at all of the crises that I've wanted us to be addressing, all of the public policy problems I've been wanting us to be solving that we haven't been doing for the last several years. We're not allowed to have hearings if we're in the minority because we don't control the gavel, but we can have roundtables, and then, if the majority is willing to give you a room. So we had a room 2 days ago, and I had a roundtable about the long-term consequences of gun violence on American communities, because after the networks have arrived and they've covered, just most recently in Georgia, 2 children, 2 students, 2 teachers were slaughtered in Georgia. I think 17 people injured. Even the same day that there was a mass shooting that included former President Donald Trump on July 13th, there were 3 other mass shootings that day in America, including one that had 4 people killed and more than 20 people injured in Birmingham, Alabama. So this is just not ending. And so I wanted to have a hearing about, okay, what happens when the TV lights are off, the cameras have gone home, the attention of the country has moved on to the next massacre. What happens in that community trying to recover? And we had a number of high school principals, including from Columbine, including from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School in Florida and so on. And this goes on for years and decades. The psychological and emotional devastation, the trauma suffered by the kids involved. Some kids who were wounded obviously permanently alters their life and the lives of their family. We had an economist from Johns Hopkins who estimated that the financial costs of trying to recover from mass bloodshed, gun violence in America is $500 billion a year, $500 billion a year, which means since Columbine took place back in 1999, we've spent trillions of dollars trying to clean up the human wreckage and the financial costs of the firearm industry and the gun dealers. And they're making a great profit, but we're spending a lot more money and a lot more human agony and toil trying to deal with it. There are kids who have 24/7 hour care. And we just accept that. So I was on the January 6th select committee, right? And in addition to this being what I think was a great substantive success in terms of really documenting the violent insurrection that took place against the Union on January 6, 2021. It was a major technical success as a committee because we actually had bipartisan unity. And so instead of it being this 5-minute on each side food fight, which I know can be entertaining for people and it's got its fans, but in truth, we could be having committee hearings that are far more productive and meaningful as we did. And I would like to have a series of hearings on gun violence so we can really address the problem. We've got massive bipartisan unity on what to do. More than 90% of the people support a universal violent criminal background check in America. Vast majority of Republicans, Democrats, independents, everybody supports red flag laws. Big support for ban on military style assault weapons so that 18-year-olds don't show up in, you know, at the Tree of Life Synagogue or the Mother Emanuel Church or the Pulse nightclub or what have you.
Yeah.
So we've got a legislative program behind it, but what we need is a series of hearings that are gripping for people, that are you know, multimedia, that feature video, that tell the story in a compelling way, so we can actually make progress. So that's my plan for the new Congress.
So
that's just one example, of course.
No, that's excellent. And so people have talked about having photos of these 5-year-olds, but that's another story in your hearings. So you're a very renowned constitutional scholar. On that topic, though, what do we do about the Second Amendment? Is there something we do about it, or is that are we stuck with it?
You know, the Republicans get up, they say, Raskin wants to repeal the Second Amendment. I say, I don't want you to repeal the Second Amendment. I want you to read the Second Amendment, okay? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Supreme Court, even in its most conservative opinions, Fels versus District of Columbia, has stated that the Second Amendment right is a right to have a handgun for self-defense. It's a right to a rifle for hunting and recreation, but nobody has a right to dangerous weapons, assault weapons, things that are unusual. Nobody's got a right to obtain any weapons without going through a licensing system, a background check before you purchase the firearm. And I mean, that's Scalia writing. Just go check out the Heller case. So the problem is that my colleagues believe that the purpose of the Second Amendment is to give the people the right to overthrow the government. They actually believe, I mean, you know, I can give you all the statements from Matt Gaetz saying that the meaning of the Second Amendment is the people have to have an arsenal that allows them to maintain the power to have an insurrection against an oppressive, tyrannical government. Chip Roy says the same thing. Lauren Boebert said the Second Amendment doesn't have anything to do with hunting unless you're talking about hunting tyrants, right? So we need to debunk that. It's a complete fallacy. There's nothing in the Second Amendment about revolution or insurrection. It talks about a well-regulated militia, and the Ku Klux Klan and the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are not a militia. A militia is organized by the state government. Its officers are appointed by the state government. And then if you check out Article 1, Section 8, Clause 14, Congress arms and organizes and disciplines the militias. And then Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 says Congress has the power to call forth the militias from the states in order to repel foreign invasions and suppress insurrection. Right? So is it possible that there's an invisible ink, a right to overthrow the government that means that you have a right to tanks and assault weapons, but then the Constitution explicitly says Congress can call forth the militias to put down insurrections? I don't think so.
Yeah. Jamie, so you know, God willing, you will you might be chair of the Oversight Committee after Jan 5th, if that's what you would like, I assume, to have happen. And you're incredibly effective at moving the dial and nudging and making a difference. And you know, not only in the Second Amendment space, but also you've talked about the Supreme Court, the structure of the Supreme Court, the structure of the Electoral College. It's fairly clear that you and many think they are not appropriately structured, these three things. Can you give us some hope? I mean, instead of just sort of saying, which I know, or we do, this is wrong, wrong, wrong. How can we fix it? And in 5 years, will you be able to say, yes, we did X, Y, and Z in those three areas?
You said the Supreme Court, the Electoral College,
And Second Amendment.
the Second Amendment. Okay, so, well, let's see. So let's start with the easy one, the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not blocking our progress. The NRA and the GOP, forgive my partisanship here, are blocking our progress. So we don't need to amend the Constitution in order to make substantial improvements in the American situation. There's 25 times more gun violence in America than there is in European countries, in the EU countries. Today, shockingly, gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teenagers under 18 years old. Again, that's just globally unique. There's nothing like that. And it's because of our completely open-ended, lax, promiscuous gun laws that just say, basically anybody can go get anything. So we got to close those loopholes in Brady and have a universal violent felon background check. We don't need to change the Second Amendment for that. We had a decade-long ban on assault weapons that succeeded in reducing a lot of the violence, and it was never struck down. So that one, I think, constitutionally, it's easy. Politically, it's extremely difficult, but we don't need a fundamental constitutional change. Now, having said that, I will say, even if we make all that happen, we're still going to have the highest rate of gun death on earth in societies that are not in wartime, of the wealthier industrialized countries. So we would need to change the Second Amendment to go beyond that, but we're not talking about that, and I don't want that. And I'm talking about using what is perfectly constitutional today that we can do, but that means we do have to debunk this insurrectionary theory of the Second Amendment, which means that the NRA and the GOP say, no, not one change. We don't want, any regulation at all. Okay, so that's on that one. On the Supreme Court, look, I'm with President Biden on this. We got the highest court in the land with the lowest ethical standards, the only court in America that does not have a binding ethics code. I mean, your students are, government workers, employees, officials. Everybody's governed by an ethics code. There's got to be a place to complain. The Supreme Court of the United States is the one place where if you think, Justice Alito cannot fairly render justice in your particular case because he and his wife are flying the American flag upside down or, flying flags of pro-insurrection or whatever, you have nobody to complain to other than Justice Alito himself. So we need a binding ethics code. We probably need an inspector general for the U.S. Supreme Court. In Congress, we have a $50 gift ban, and it applies to the executive branch.
Yeah.
I mean, you have members of Congress reading the newspaper. Clarence Thomas pocketed more than $4 million from his billionaire sugar daddy, Harlan Crow, who gave him a recreational vehicle that cost $500,000 that's got a dining room in it, paid off his mother's home mortgage, paid off, I think it's a nephew's private school tuition, and so on and so forth. I mean, it just makes no sense. We'd be going to jail for that. That's bribery in our case. Why did the Supreme Court justices who make double what we make, by the way, I hope I don't sound bitter about that, but why do they get to, take deluxe foreign vacations paid for by people who have a vested interest in litigation before the Supreme Court? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So we need an ethics code. But having said that, that's just half of it. There's an ethics crisis at the court, but there's a legitimacy crisis too. And I don't have the time to get into all of it, but they have packed and stacked and gerrymandered the Supreme Court. The GOP has lost the popular vote in 8 out of the last 9 presidential elections, and yet they've appointed 6 out of 9 current Supreme Court justices. So you wonder why we're in a situation where the vast majority of the country believes in the fundamental, the court said, constitutional freedom of women to make their own decisions about abortion. And yet the Supreme Court destroys that right. despite, many of them having testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee that it was settled law, right? Well, you can see structurally how the anti-democratic mechanisms in our Constitution are interlocking, right? Where the Electoral College produces a minority result repeatedly in conjunction with things like voter suppression and gerrymandering and so on. And then the Supreme Court gets appointed through that process, including through a lot of procedural irregularities, like when Mitch McConnell would not even grant a hearing to my constituent, Merrick Garland, when he was chief judge of the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. He could not even get a hearing in the Senate because he was nominated 11 months before the election in February of 2020 by Barack Obama after Justice Scalia died. McConnell said it's too close to the next election. And yet in September, I'm sorry, that was in 16, that was in February of 2016. In September of 2020, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, 2 months before the election, when early voting had started in a number of states, he said, well, of course, we're going to go ahead and have a hearing and have a vote on Amy Coney Barrett. And they did. So there's a lot of illegitimacy. What I want to say about that is that we have 13 federal circuits in America. We have 9 Supreme Court justices. That means 4 circuits at any one time, at least, are not going to be represented on the court. Today, it's much worse than that. It's a majority of the federal circuits that have no representation on the U.S. Supreme Court. We have 5 justices who come from New York City. And no disrespect intended to any of you New Yorkers out there, but that's 5 U.S. Supreme Court justices, 1 for each borough in New York, and then you have entire regions of the country that have nobody on the court. So let's use this as an opportunity to open the Supreme Court up to make sure that everybody's represented. We'll move to 18-year terms for the justices. Each president gets 2 appointments, and we'll be able to overcome these severe crises that are taking place in the court. And then on the Electoral College, I mean, it will take a constitutional amendment, 2/3 of the states, 3/4, 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the states in order to amend the Constitution. But there is a strategy short of amending the Constitution that I think will work. And I initiated it when I was a state senator in Maryland. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, where we've invited states to join the compact to say, we'll cast our Electoral College votes for the winner of the national vote rather than the winner of our state. But we'll do that once there are 270 electors represented in the coalition, and then it'll be determinative every time. We've had, I think it's 15 or 16 states that have joined. We're more than 2/3 of the way there in terms of the Electoral College votes we need. A number of big states have joined, including California and New York. This, I believe, will be the bridge to get us to a constitutional amendment. If you look at the history of constitutional amendments, they've generally started in that way, where there's been state action first. Like take the 19th Amendment with women's suffrage. A majority of the states had extended voting rights to women first at the state level, and then that built up the coalitional power to get it done as a constitutional amendment. And the 17th Amendment worked the exact same way for direct election of U.S. senators. Dozens of states were saying, we'll have a popular election. The legislature will be bound by the popular vote to choose whoever is elected. But that led to the 17th Amendment shifting the mode of election from the legislatures to the people.
Wonderful. Wow. Boy, you just covered 3 PhD topics. I'm impressed. I threw a lot at you. One more giant topic. And by the way, it's wonderful to have your constitutional law background, your Harvard Law School, you're teaching, and you're a fabulous resource there where you are. So last question for me before I give you over to the students, and theirs are always better than mine. As this lead impeachment manager, I wonder what lessons, a couple of lessons you can give us that might prevent January 6th from happening again, if you think that it should be prevented. If in fact either side disputes the election outcome on November 6th, what do you think might prevent that sort of violence?
Well, there are a number of kind of minor technical parliamentary fixes that we engaged in. It's now not enough to have 1 representative and 1 senator to challenge the acceptance of electoral college votes that have been committed to us by the certificate of ascertainment sent in by the governor based on election results in his or her state. It's now a 20% threshold to challenge that. You know, we made clear what was perfectly obvious before, that the vice president has no authority to step outside of his or her constitutional role and just unilaterally declare somebody to be the president or unilaterally rebuff electoral college votes tendered by the states. So stuff like that. We also have physically fortified Congress, and I'm not so worried in 2024 because, frankly, Joe Biden's president, not Donald Trump. I mean, so Joe Biden is in control of the National Guard and has control over the federal government apparatus, and we've created non-scalable fencing to protect Congress. It's sort of sad to have to say that, given that we got through more than 2 centuries of American democracy, including in 1861, right on the precipice of the Civil War, when we never had anything happen remotely like what happened, with 140 of our officers wounded, injured, broken jaws, noses, necks, heart attacks, strokes, you name it. But so we've done those, I would say, simple corrective steps. You know, I mean, we should get rid of the electoral college, because if we just had an election the way we elect senators, representatives, governors, mayors, and whoever gets the most votes wins, we would not have this protracted Byzantine process with all of these different pressure points where a strategic bad faith actor like Donald Trump can try to overthrow the authentic result of the election. But look, here's the bottom line, and I say this not in any mood of pessimism, but rather a mood of determination. People have to understand there are not specific legislative and parliamentary fixes to the problem of people who have an essentially autocratic sensibility or a fascist determination to knock over the entire table, regardless of what rules you put on the table. There are people who think they have the right to rule, and they're willing to lie, cheat, steal, use duplicity and violence to get there. We're not going to be able to pass a law to stop them. It is going to have to be the will of the people to continue the experiment in democratic self-government.
Mm-hmm.
That means we have to adjust
Mm-hmm.
to circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
because the people who want to overthrow it have a bag of tricks, and you never know what they're going to throw in next.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that can be on either side. So the conclusion is vote, right?
It can be on many sides, you know, and there are people who simply think that they have some divine predestination or some
Right.
supernatural mandate to rule over everybody else, and that, of course, is completely antithetical to the spirit of democratic self-government.
Right, and the conclusion is vote, right? Vote.
I mean, voting is the necessary instrument by which we decide. People have to submit their case to the people, but you've got to believe in facts. There's no democracy without facts, because who won the election is a fact itself. So if you destroy people's confidence in facts or belief in facts, you are destroying the underpinnings of democracy. My dad used to say that democracy's got to have a ground to stand on. That ground is the truth.
Right. Well, thank God we can vote. Okay. I'm going to give you to Mindy now for the better questions coming from the floor. So thank you, Jamie, so far. And go ahead, Mindy.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for the wonderful questions so far. You can feel free to keep them coming, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I'm going to do some combining of questions so that we can maximize them. And I'll also say we got some comments already. Thanking you for the thorough answers on Supreme Court and Electoral College and Second Amendment, so we probably won't dig as far into them. For our first question, slightly more lighthearted, but a good one. This is from Lauren Wilkinson, who's from our executive MPA class of 2024 at Fels. In these challenging environments, how do you effectively use humor to foster collaboration, build consensus, and educate the public in your role? You're always very engaging and funny as a public speaker, which helps the audience stay engaged. Oops, I'm gonna unmute. You're muted. Sorry.
Yes. Hey, Lauren, thank you for that delightful question. You made my day. Look, I mean, I think a sense of humor is absolutely critical to make it through these days, and it might be of general utility being in politics and government, but certainly during a time of incredible polarization and stress, I think a sense of humor is essential. I mean, it's sort of a finding against interest for me because I would love to, give everybody, constitutional law lectures, but everybody's eyes glaze over. But if I can make it a little bit funny, then it comes a lot better for them. Like Louisiana recently passed a 10 Commandments resolution endorsing the 10 Commandments and saying that they're going to put the 10 Commandments up in every public school classroom. Now, I could cite to you chapter and verse, so to speak, why constitutionally that's unacceptable. There's a case right on point called Stone versus Graham. But I realized that, I could also challenge it in a way that embarrasses the people who are doing it. So when they got to the House of Representatives with this, I said, the 10 Commandments have been doing fine for millennia without an endorsement from the Freedom Caucus and the U.S. House of Representatives. No, they insisted the 10 Commandments is the basis for the Bill of Rights. I said, really? Let's examine that claim. The first commandment says, thou shalt have no other God before me. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What do those two things have to do with each other? How is one the basis of the other? I mean, maybe it's not an exact contradiction of the other, but they're certainly moving in somewhat different directions, right? Which is why under the separation of church and state, according to Madison and Jefferson and Tom Paine and Ben Franklin, we would allow people to make their own decisions about what they believe in and what their faith entails rather than having the government. But no, they insisted. So I went to the Rules Committee. They wanted to bring out a vote on the 10 Commandments. And I said, well, my proposed rule is this. If we're going to vote on the 10 Commandments, we should have to vote on each commandment separately. And they shouldn't be able to get away with the omnibus package. And you shouldn't be allowed to vote for any commandment that you yourself have ever violated, because then you'll be taking the name of the Lord in vain. So anyway, I think we do have to see the comic aspects of all of this so that we're not just drowning in tragedy all the time.
Great answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our next question is from Michael Brian Bach, who is a member of our Fels MPA class of 2025. He says, in recent years, you published a book about your personal experience with tragedy amidst public service and lessons for others. As future public servants, the students who are here and on this call, what advice do you have about keeping balance and having a compass in public service? How do you stay human? How do you remain humane to others?
Thank you for that excellent question. I mean, I don't know what the right answer to that is. I mean, I will tell you that, I mean, I'm a middle child, so I like to try to bring people together. And when I was in the state Senate, I always had a ton of friends across the aisle. We did a lot of stuff together. The Congress, DC is a far more polarized kind of combative environment than Annapolis, and I think a lot of state legislatures. But I try to make friends with people, and it doesn't work in all cases. I will tell you honestly, frankly, not everybody wants to be your friend necessarily, and not everybody wants to be friends with people from the other party. But I've got one friend named Lauren Boebert. People are always surprised to hear that, but she's a big texter, and we text back and forth, and we disagree on almost everything, but I think she's a decent person, and God's not finished with any of us yet. And so I try to be friends with her. And sometimes, you don't know. I mean, Liz Cheney has become one of my best political friends. And again, we disagree on a ton of stuff, but of course, she acted so honorably and bravely in standing up for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights against Donald Trump. And the MAGA mob that came to attack us on January 6th. So she and I have done a lot of good work together. I don't even really consider that so much crossing the aisle anymore, just because we've been such comrades in arms and just trying to defend constitutional democracy. That's why Lauren Boebert might be a better example, because she would be voting against me on everything related to January 6th. That's tough. And nonetheless, if we're not going to civil war, and I hope we're not going to civil war, then we have to learn to make friends everywhere.
Yeah, I wish we could clone that relationship more broadly. So you need to model it for everybody. Okay, Mindy.
Thanks so much. We have a bunch of questions that are related to Project 2025 or things that may happen or that have been promised to happen if Donald Trump is elected president. So there's a number of questions. Is it possible to implement Project 2025? If that does happen, what do you see as the impact on democracy? What role could the Oversight Committee play in helping it not become a witch hunt against LGBT or other groups of folks in federal government? A number of questions on that from
Well, look,
Go ahead.
Dear Elizabeth, you tell me if I'm starting to sound too partisan. All right.
No, you're allowed to be you. I'm careful.
Okay. Well, look, I've been to 26 states in this campaign because an ounce of prevention is going to be worth a pound or a ton of cure later on. We've got to prevent Project 2025 from ever coming into being. One of my colleagues yesterday said at a hearing, he didn't understand why the Democrats keep talking about Project 2025. He read the whole thing over the weekend, all 900 pages, and it's a snoozer. And I found that a very revealing answer, because to them, it all seems absolutely obvious that you would, abolish Head Start and the Department of Education and sack 50,000 professional civil service employees and replace them with party loyalists and sycophants to the president, and give the president unilateral authority to replace all the members of federal boards and commissions in the country, convert the Department of Justice into an instrument of the president's political will. And by the way, Trump is not kidding about that. There's an interesting, really fascinating article in the New York Times you got to check out about how he literally was demanding the investigation and prosecution of Hillary Clinton. And then when the FBI director would not do it, James Comey, then he insisted that he be investigated and prosecuted. Same with the deputy director of the FBI, Scott McCabe. Same with his own private lawyer, who did everything Donald Trump asked him to do for many years, Michael Cohen, and then basically couldn't take it anymore, and they tried to make him the fall guy for a bunch of things, and they turned on him, and they had him put in solitary confinement when he was actually released from prison, and he refused to sign an agreement saying he would not write a book about Donald Trump. They had him return to prison during COVID-19 when all these people were released and put into solitary confinement for 2 weeks before a federal judge said, this is America and you cannot engage in political retaliation against people simply because they want to exercise their First Amendment rights. So anyway, I take all that stuff extremely seriously. The truth is, I've not begun to think about what we would do if this actually comes to pass and we have to try to defeat all of these things. Obviously, we're going to be in a much stronger position if Democrats are in control of the House or of the Senate, or look, I am out there agitating for a landslide in America. This is not a normal election, as Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and hundreds of other former Republican officials, including 80 or 90 who served in Trump's own administration, will tell you this is not a normal election. We're talking about defending our system of government. So everybody needs to make that voter plan, help everybody else in your family make that voter plan, and so on. I'll have to think more, but I don't want to entertain the hypothetical right now. All of my energy is making sure that doesn't come to pass.
Thanks so much. And of course, Fels is a nonpartisan organization, but we want to reflect the questions that come in from folks and appreciate your insights on that. Next question is from Jacob Polakov, one of our MPA alumni. And he says, from one Jewish person working in government to another, how do you deal with the societal stressors that impact Jews in government, namely latent or overt anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And I think it's important for us to address. I mean, I do believe that anti-Semitism and racism are the gateway to destruction of liberal democracy. So it's not just a threat to Jews or Black people or Asian Americans or Hispanics who are undergoing a particular kind of racist attack or ridicule or, vilification. I mean, it is part of the unraveling generally of what it means to have a liberal democracy. So I mean, each one of those forms of prejudice and hostility is unique in its own way. Each has its own history. Anti-Semitism certainly has a history going back thousands of years. And yet I think that all of the attacks on racial, ethnic, religious minorities in our society are connected to each other and reflect a determination to undermine the logic of democracy, which is that we should proceed on the basis of common sense, reason, right? That's what Tom Paine meant with common sense, the sense we have in common. It's like you have sight, you have sound, you have smell, you have touch, you have taste, and you have common sense, the sense we have when we're willing to reason together to make progress for everybody. And obviously there's got to be some basic sense of civic compassion and solidarity, empathy there. But if we say that certain groups are not part of it, certain groups of people are eating cats and dogs, or certain groups of people, as Trump said the other day, are going to control the election and they're going to have a lot to do with my loss or defeat, then what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for stereotyping and scapegoating. And again, a very different form of government. So I'm alarmed by the fact that the former president had Nicholas Fuentes, a neo-Nazi Holocaust revisionist, over to his house for dinner. I'm alarmed by all of the statements that are coming out on basically a daily basis. But for me, and everybody responds differently, like I cannot retreat. I'm not going to a cocoon. I'm not accepting the idea that Jews or Blacks or women or anybody can only exist within their group. That to me is not what America is. America is about all of us together. And that's why it is still, even with all of the problems we've had, still the greatest multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic constitutional democracy on earth, and the envy of the world, and a place where all of us can be proud to be citizens. There's nowhere else I would rather live. And I've lived in other countries, but I always miss America very sharply. And I love the possibilities that have been created for everybody here.
Thank you so much. A number of questions about polarization and where folks are. I'll ask this one from Brent Peterkin, who's an alum of our executive MPA program at Fels. Is there a sense that there are signs of an emergent group of younger centrist Republicans that could introduce a more moderate wave in the future, bringing legislative bodies closer to consensus on more moderate or progressive stances, like topics like climate change, women's reproductive health, education, immigration, criminal justice? In short, do you think we will remain as divided on issues in the future as we are now?
Well, thank you very much for that thoughtful question. I don't think we're really that divided. I think on everything you're talking about, substantively, abortion rights, we have commanding majorities in the country that support women's right to choose. I mean, when I first got to Congress, I heard Republicans all the time talking about abortion being murder, abortion being a Holocaust, and so on. And they may still believe it, and they may still support the Life Begins at Conception Act to ban abortion nationwide. I imagine they do. That's Speaker Johnson's legislation, but they don't talk about it because they know where America is on it. Just like the vast majority of Americans accept the reality of climate science and climate change and want us to be acting on it. Just like I was saying in the gun violence context, we've got tremendous substantive agreement. But what we do have is party polarization. And that's a very different thing because that's an artifact of our structural political arrangements. And specifically the gerrymandering of our state legislative and congressional districts, which we've tried to target in the For the People Act. And if we win, we will go right after the gerrymandering of our districts, which basically, do create a partisan polarization in the country that's not reflective of common sense. And so I was just down in North Carolina, for example, which is basically a 50-50 state. The Democrats win statewide elections sometimes, the Republicans win statewide elections sometimes, the registration numbers are about equal. But if you look at our congressional delegation, this time it's likely to result in 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats. Now, why would a 50-50 state produce that kind of lopsided number? And the same thing in, you name it, Georgia, Arkansas, Texas, because of gerrymandering. The team that gets in that controls the computer technology, and a 7th grader could do this, will slice and dice the districts in such a way as to pack as many, members of the opposite party into as few districts as possible, and then allow them to win a majority. So that's a serious problem, and that is creating polarization, because if you're, for example, a Republican who gets elected in a district like that, all you're worried about is that Donald Trump is going to endorse somebody against you if you don't go along with everything that Donald Trump says about climate change, about gun safety, about what happened on January 6th. I mean, why do you have 80% of the Republicans saying that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, even though he lost it by 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, and 60 federal and state courts in the land, including 8 judges appointed by Trump himself, rejected every claim of electoral fraud and corruption. And yet it's just an article of faith on their side that he won. Well, it's because he says he won and they have to go along with it. Otherwise, there's going to be political reprisals against them. So I think we've got to take on some of those structural problems like gerrymandering that create such dysfunction and derangement in our politics, even when we've got massive public agreement as to what to do about basic public policy issues.
Thanks so much. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more. Elizabeth always gets the last question, but I'm going to try to squeeze in one more if we can. And this is, again, from a number of folks, just a little softball question to end. How do you navigate the complexities of securing government funding, balancing strategy, and practical considerations? Just the dissertation of many.
Yeah, I mean, the good news about that is a lot of that happens for you. I mean, that's what's great about being in the legislative body. I mean, there are some people who they just want to be the boss, they want to be an executive. And then there are those of us who I think have a legislative temperament, and we like the idea that there's a committee. For example, the Appropriations Committee, I've never served on an Appropriations Committee, and there are people who they love to serve on appropriations. That's their whole purpose in life is to be an appropriator. And when there are certain things that I want appropriations for, I go and I tell them, or I'll sign a letter, or I'll try to convince them, so on. I mean, it's important to me, but for them, it's kind of everything, the way that like the Constitution and the rule of law are sort of everything to me. I mean, it's not literally everything, but it's the dominant thing. And so I'm willing to allow legislation to go through the committee process and to trust what comes out. It's obviously a lot better if there's real bipartisanship taking place. And if we're too split, and if, we're off on a MAGA tangent, then we're just going to be voting against it. But when it's working, like it worked when I was in Annapolis, I'm really able to rely on other people to deploy their expertise in the way that I deploy my expertise in my sort of narrow field,
Thank you so much. I think, Elizabeth, are you with us?
Yes, hi. I just put my picture on for a second because I want to get something to show folks. But Jamie, 2 things quickly. First of all, can we have 3 extra minutes? You've given us so much time already.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about your, just before my very last question, tell us about Democracy Summer. It's the most amazing program, and I want people to know about it because it's relevant to this particular audience.
Well, we spend every year, like, I think it's more than $2 billion when you add it up, $2 billion on elections. And a lot of it is, and this is a nonpartisan point, is just for TV ads and pollsters and consultants and all that stuff. And, I mean, I believe that politics at its best is about education. You educate the public about the system, about the process, about the issues, about potential solutions, about rights and freedoms and so on. So anyway, Democracy Summer is just, I put all of the money for my campaign into it that I'm not giving away to other campaigns and, to other candidates. And in Democracy Summer, oh good, there's our poster done by Shepard Fairey, who made, the beautiful Obama Hope poster, and he just made one of Kamala too. But anyway, Democracy Summer, we get high school and college kids to come and learn about politics, and then they knock on doors and canvass and do digital organizing and fundraising and stuff. And that's my whole campaign, basically. It's like a school. And it is spread across the country. We had more than 1,000 young people across America doing it in 44 different states. And I hope that the Democratic Party, at least, will make our campaigns much more educational in nature and much less just about 30-second TV ads and so on, and that they have their place. But I hope that we're actually going to be educating young people and building leaders and organizers for the long term. So Elizabeth, thank you for allowing me to do a shout out to Democracy.
No, I love my poster too, by the way. I advertise you. Well, and it's nonpartisan as well. It's basically engagement. So you have a great website on it. If anybody's interested, there's a great website on Democracy Summer. And so my last question, Jamie, is what I love and people love to hear, and that is, we all want to be you in our next life. You're such an unbelievable role model, both personally and professionally. What 2 or 3 things might you have liked to tell your 25-year-old self?
Well, those are kind words, but I mean, I mean, if you see the way I spend most of my days, I had much higher ambitions for myself. But anyway, I wish I had learned more languages when my mind was younger and more supple, and I had greater neuroplasticity. So definitely learn as many languages as you can. I would tell the young people today, definitely focus on writing and on reading. I know it's getting to be sort of a lost art in the age of tweets and texts and everything like that. But I think it's absolutely essential to have a society where there's real critical thinking. If we don't, I think we're setting ourselves up for authoritarianism and for autocracy. I did a lot of travel when I was younger. I wish I had done more travel. I wish I had traveled in Asia. I traveled more in Europe and Latin America and a little bit in Africa. I wish I had done more travel because I don't know how you feel about it, Elizabeth, but I feel when you get into middle age, it's just harder. I'm amazed at what Joe Biden does in terms of flying everywhere, but of course he's got his own airplane, and he probably has a bet on the airplane. I don't know. It's not like that. So get your travel in now, get your languages now, just be as worldly as you can. I mean, I would think of it this way, that like when you're in your 20s, the whole world should be your neighborhood. And then when you're in your 30s and 40s, your neighborhood should be your world, and you should really get to know your community and where you're living, and and come to serve everybody there, if that's your passion. So
Right.
For whatever that's worth.
Well, Jamie, when you're president, you'll have Air Force One, so then we can get you over to Asia, okay? And we're going to run your campaign, or at least some of us. Yeah. Anyway, I want to thank you hugely from all of us. You are a huge road warrior. I should have mentioned what you did, that you have been in 26 states, I think maybe this year. And I know you're up for election. You, of course, are going to crush it. But to give what you do to others and raise and support others, just immensely impressive. You are a storied American patriot, and you've given unbelievable service. I think, honestly, you're the role model we've almost never seen. So I should have mentioned, as people know, I think you were on the floor January 6th. Your daughter was up in the balcony, I think, filming it for a class, and then you had huge personal and health issues either side of that. So I mean, tested like no one, equally, I mean, so inspiring. So I ramble and ramble, but if we can have a fraction of your determination and your ability to do good for the country, I mean, these students, no pressure, that's, they're the future. So Jamie, thank you. Thank you. Go and do good work. And we really will be following you. You have a giant fan club here.
Well, thank you, dear Elizabeth, and thanks for everything you're doing with the young people in Pennsylvania, and thanks for contributing so essentially to the magnificent political culture of your state. It's really great.
All right, well, come visit us anytime. We'll see you in person hopefully again. All
All the
righty,
best.
and thanks everyone for joining. Take care.
Thanks so much, everyone.